All right, embossing. There are thousands upon thousands of embossing powders out there. So the sky's the limit really when it comes to embossing. There's metallics, there's glitter, sparkly ones. There's the other, not the other one right there. There are different variegated ones where there's a few different colors within the mix. These ones here are glazes, so they are like a clear translucent embossing powder. And then there's just some solid colors. And by solid, I mean they'll end up being shiny unless there's some specific ones that have a matte finish to them. But the process with embossing is the same really no matter what powder you choose. Now, most of the time we use the Versamark, the watermark stamp for embossing. The other option that you can do, if say for instance you want to do one image embossed with a red embossing, say for Valentine's Day, what you can do is you can use a red ink that stays wet for a little bit longer and then a clear powder with it in order to give the illusion that you've used red ink for it. 1 second, I need a piece of paper here. You're going to need some scrap piece of paper, but this is the process. So I need to get these powders out of the way because I don't need them. I'm going to emboss with gold. I'm going to use my stain pad because the gold is an opaque color, so even if this is a little bit off tint in places, the gold is going to cover it. You're never going to see through. So I'm tapping my pad and I'm making sure to cover the entire surface. So I worked at a scrapbooking store for years, and so often I would get people going, but the stamp is bigger than the pad. How do I do it? Like, this is how you do it. Flip the stamp over and pounce it up and down. You don't want to do this because you can wreck your pad that way, and by pouncing it up and down you can get good coverage. You can see exactly where the ink is because it's shiny. I'm not sure if you can see it on camera. And then you're going to press it down firmly. Now I typically hold my finger in the center so that my stamp is not going to move, and then I will press around the perimeter of the stamp to make sure it gets a good impression to it. Pour the powder on the image here and then tap away the excess. Now this one was really good. There's not really any excess there. To get it off, you can flick this side gently. If by chance I had, say, a fingerprint here and the powder stuck to it, all you do then is you take a soft brush and you just brush it off. You have to do that before you melt it, because if you wait until after it's melted, it's going to be stuck to the page. You're not going to be able to get it off. All of this excess goes back into my container. So I'm not wasting any of that excess that I poured onto it. Close the container before embossing. Now to emboss, you need a heat gun. It will not work with a hairdryer because a hairdryer blows air. A heat gun emits heat. By blowing air, what it would be doing would be drying that ink and blowing the powder right off. By emitting heat, it's not blowing anything. It is just melting that powder. So it's going to be a little bit loud, so I'm not going to talk during it, but here we go. You're going to see it go from dull and matte to shiny and gold. So you'll notice it took a bit for the first little bit to start melting, and that's because my heat gun was cold. The other thing you'll notice, I'm moving it around slowly, giving it time to melt. I'm not doing this. So many people, that's their first reaction, is to do this, and all you're doing is spreading the heat around it and ends up taking a lot longer. By moving it around slowly, you're giving it a chance to melt the powder. The other thing is I typically do this holding a piece of the paper because then the heat can go through. If you do it on a surface, you either want to make sure that your surface can handle the heat, or you want to make sure that you have a mat there to absorb the heat. And sometimes if you're on a surface, it can curl the paper up a little bit. The other thing is if you are holding the paper, make sure to point the heat gun away. It does get quite hot, and you don't want to burn yourself. So I'm going to do the last half now. All right, and then before we do any techniques, I tend to tint it or tilt it in the light to make sure I haven't missed an area. If there's an area that's not as shiny as the rest of it, it's not quite melted. There we go. So this piece is ready to use. We're going to be using it in the next section where we're going to be doing some watercoloring.